Freedom always sounds simple, until the moment you actually have it. The first time Sebastian Hale told me I was free, his voice didn't sound like a gift, it sounded like a verdict, cold and measured, like everything else about him, and yet I didn't feel relief, not the way I thought I would after months inside a world that was never meant for someone like me. I stood at the edge of his estate, the iron gates stretching nearly 12 feet high, black bars cutting into the gray morning like a line drawn between two lives, one I survived, and one I was about to step into. My fingers tightened slightly around the small hand in mine, warm, steady, real, the only thing in this entire story that didn't feel like a transaction. Behind me, I could hear the faint gravel crunch of his shoes, slow, controlled, deliberate. He didn't rush, he never rushed. Power doesn't hurry, it waits, and everything else moves around it. I didn't turn around, not yet, because I already knew what I would see. Tailored suit, dark as the cars lined behind him, shoulders squared, like he carried a city on his back and expected it to stay there, eyes that never missed anything, especially not weakness, especially not mine, except that was the problem. He had been watching me for months, and he still hadn't figured it out. I wasn't weak, I never had been. You can leave, he said again, closer now, his voice low enough that it didn't need to be loud, it never needed to be. I felt it more than I heard it, like pressure in the air before a storm. I nodded once, a small movement, controlled, just like him, but not for the same reasons. I wasn't controlling power, I was holding together something far more fragile, something he couldn't see, something he couldn't buy. The gates began to open with a slow mechanical hum, inch by inch, like the world itself was hesitating, giving me time to change my mind, but I didn't move right away. I just stood there, breathing in the quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in places where no one dares to speak unless they're told to. And for the first time since the night he made me that offer, I realized something that should have terrified me. I wasn't afraid of leaving, I wasn't afraid of him, I wasn't afraid of anything he had built, because none of it had ever really touched me, not the rules, not the guards, not the walls, not even the contract that started all of this, because the truth was simple, brutally simple. He thought he had given me a way out, but he never understood that I had never been trapped. And as I finally stepped forward, past the threshold, into a world that felt unfamiliar and mine at the same time, I let myself smile. Just a little, because behind me stood a man who could command loyalty, fear, silence, an entire empire that moved at the sound of his voice, and yet he couldn't do the one thing that mattered now, he couldn't make me stay. I did not look back again after that first step, not because I was strong, but because I understood something most people never do. Looking back gives power to the person you are trying to leave, and Sebastian Hale had already taken enough without ever touching me the way people would assume. It started months ago on a night that smelled like rain and polished marble. The kind of night where everything feels too expensive to break and too controlled to breathe. I remember the way the floor reflected the chandeliers above, how my shoes sounded too loud against it, like I did not belong there, because I did not. I was there to replace someone, just for one night, just to carry trays and disappear, but I never disappeared, not that night, not when his voice cut through the room for the first time, calm, precise, the kind of voice that did not ask for attention but owned it anyway. I did not know his name then, only that people shifted when he moved, conversations softened, eyes lowered, and something inside me tightened without permission, not fear exactly, something sharper, like instinct. I should have left, I should have stayed invisible, but I made a mistake, a small one, the kind that does not seem important until it changes everything. I looked at him, just for a second too long, and he noticed. Of course he did, men like him always notice. His eyes met mine across the room, steady, unreadable, and in that moment it felt like the air between us disappeared, like the distance did not matter, like I had stepped into something I did not understand. I broke eye contact first, turned, told myself it was nothing, just another wealthy man in a city full of them. But then someone called my name, not my real name, the temporary one I had borrowed for the job, and when I turned back, he was already walking toward me, not fast, never fast, but certain, like the outcome had already been decided before he took the first step. I remember the exact moment he stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint line near his eyebrow, a scar that did not ruin his face but made it sharper, more real. He did not smile, he did not introduce himself. He just studied me like I was a question he intended to answer. You are not supposed to be here, he said, not accusing, not curious, just stating a fact, and I should have apologized, should have stepped back, should have disappeared like everyone else in that room knew how to do, but I did not. I met his eyes again, steady this time, and said the only thing that felt true, neither am I. Something shifted then, subtle, almost invisible, but I felt it, like a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. He tilted his head slightly, considering me in a way that made the rest of the room fade into something distant and unimportant, and then he said it, the sentence that rewrote everything that came after. Then stay, not a request, not an invitation, a decision, and before I could answer, before I could even process what that meant, he added, I have a proposal for you, and that was the moment my life split into before and after, before him, before the contract, before I learned what it meant to be chosen by someone who never heard the word no, and after, where every choice looked like it belonged to him, even when it did not, even when I refused to break. He did not sit down when he said it, and that was the first thing I noticed. Men who negotiate usually take a seat, they make it feel equal, like both sides have something to offer, but Sebastian Heir remained standing, hands loosely at his sides, as if the room itself belonged to him and I was simply allowed to exist in it for a moment longer. The music from the gala continued behind us, soft and distant, like it belonged to another world entirely. I do not make this kind of offer twice, he said, his voice low enough that no one else could hear, but clear enough that every word landed exactly where he wanted it to. I should have laughed, or walked away, or asked what kind of offer required that tone, but something in the way he watched me made all of those reactions feel pointless, like he already knew what I would say before I said it. I am not interested in whatever this is, I replied, steady, even though my pulse had started to pick up in a way I could not fully control. He did not react the way most men would when told no. There was no irritation, no surprise, just a slight shift in his gaze, like he was adjusting a calculation. You will be, he said simply. And then he explained, not all at once, not in a rush, but piece by piece, like he was placing something in front of me and letting me decide how to look at it. He spoke about time, about legacy, about things that last longer than a name on a building or a signature on a contract. And then he said the part that should have made me leave immediately, once you give me an heir, you are free to go. The words did not sound cruel when he said them, that was the unsettling part. They sounded reasonable, controlled, like this was just another agreement in a life full of them. I felt the room tilt slightly, not from fear, but from the clarity of it. He was not asking for affection, not offering a future, not pretending this was anything other than a transaction, and somehow that made it more honest than anything I had heard in a long time. You think I would agree to that? I asked, my voice quieter now, not weaker, just more focused. He studied me again, those steady eyes searching for something he had not found yet. I think you understand exactly what I am offering, he said, and he was right. I did understand, not just the words, but the space between them, the control, the expectation, the assumption that everything in his world could be arranged if the terms were clear enough. I should have said no again, louder this time, final, but instead I asked the one question that surprised even me, and if I refuse? A faint pause, almost invisible, but it was there, and in that pause I saw it, not doubt, not hesitation, something closer to curiosity, like he was more interested in my answer than the outcome. Then you walk away, he said, and he meant it. That was the problem. He would not chase, would not argue, would not force, because men like him did not need to. They built systems where people chose to stay, even when leaving was an option. I let that settle for a second, the noise of the room slowly coming back into focus, glasses clinking, voices rising, a life that felt far simpler than the one he was offering. And then I looked at him again, really looked this time, at the control, the certainty, the quiet expectation that this conversation would end the way all of his conversations did, in agreement, in compliance, in something that served him. And that was when I realized something that changed everything. He was not offering me a cage, he was offering me a test, and he did not even know it. If I say yes, I said slowly, each word deliberate, I do not belong to you. Something shifted again, sharper this time, not in him, but in the space between us. You fulfill the agreement, he replied, just as calm, just as controlled, but I shook my head slightly, not breaking eye contact. No, I said, I choose every step I take, or there is no deal. The silence that followed was different, heavier, not because of tension, but because for the first time, He was not the only one setting the terms, and when he finally nodded, just once, it was not agreement the way he was used to, it was something else entirely. The beginning of a story neither of us understood yet, and a decision I would spend months proving was never his to control. I said yes before I could dress it up as something else, not because I trusted him, not because I believed in whatever version of control he was offering, but because I recognized the moment for what it was, a door that did not open twice, and I had spent too much of my life watching doors close quietly in front of me without ever knowing what was on the other side. Sebastian did not smile when I agreed, he did not extend his hand or seal it with anything symbolic, he simply nodded once, like a decision had been confirmed rather than made, and then everything moved quickly after that, too quickly for second thoughts to take root. A car was already waiting when I stepped outside the building, black, polished, the kind that reflected city lights like a mirror. The driver did not speak, did not ask for directions, because he already knew where we were going. Of course he did, men like Sebastian do not leave details unfinished. I sat in the back seat alone, my hands resting in my lap, steady even as the city blurred past the tinted windows, familiar streets turning into something distant, something I would not return to for a long time, if ever. The drive lasted maybe 40 minutes, maybe longer. Time felt different when you knew you were crossing into something permanent. When the car finally slowed, the gates appeared first, tall, iron, controlled by something unseen. They opened before we even came to a full stop, like the house itself was expecting me, or maybe expecting him. The estate stretched further than I could see, the kind of place that did not need to prove its value because it already knew it. Lights glowed behind large windows, soft and warm, but the air outside felt cool, distant, like warmth was something you had to earn here. A man opened the car door for me, his expression neutral, respectful but not curious. I was not a guest, I understood that immediately. I was something else, something defined by a decision made less than an hour ago. Inside, everything was quiet, not empty, just controlled, footsteps softened by expensive flooring, voices low, movements efficient. No one asked me questions, no one welcomed me, they simply adjusted to my presence the way people adjust to new furniture. Something added to the space that would eventually feel permanent. Sebastian was already there when I stepped into the main room, standing near a long window that overlooked the property, his back straight, hands loosely behind him, like he had never left, like he had been here the entire time waiting for the world to catch up. He turned when he heard me, his gaze moving over me once, not in a way that made me feel seen, but in a way that measured, assessed, confirmed. Your room is prepared, he said, no greeting, no acknowledgement of what had just happened, just the next step, always the next step. I tilted my head slightly, studying him the way he had studied me earlier. And if I decide I do not like it, I asked, not because I needed the answer, but because I wanted to hear how he would say it. A faint pause, almost nothing, but enough. Then it will be changed, he replied, and there it was, not kindness, not accommodation, control presented as flexibility. I nodded once, accepting the answer for what it was, and followed the woman who had appeared silently at my side. She led me upstairs, down a long hallway lined with doors that all looked the same, until we reached one at the end, larger, quieter. She opened it without speaking and stepped aside. The room inside was everything you would expect. Large bed, soft lighting, a window that overlooked more land than I had ever seen from a single place, everything in its right place, everything untouched, waiting. I stepped inside slowly, my footsteps barely making a sound, and for a moment, just a moment, I let myself feel it, the weight of the decision, the reality of where I was, the life I had just agreed to step into. And then I exhaled, steady, controlled, because the truth settled in as clearly as the silence around me. This was not a cage, not yet, not unless I allowed it to be. And as I turned toward the door, knowing he was somewhere in this house, watching, calculating, waiting to see how I would move next, I realized something that made the corners of my mouth lift just slightly. He thought he had brought me into his world, but he had no idea I had just stepped into it on my own terms. The first night passed without sleep, not because I was afraid, but because everything was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels deliberate, like even the walls were trained not to speak unless permitted. I sat by the window for what felt like hours, watching the ground stretch endlessly under soft lights, every inch maintained, controlled, untouched by randomness. It made something inside me restless in a way I could not explain, because I had spent my entire life in places where things were unpredictable, where noise filled the gaps and chaos made you feel alive. This was different. This was precision, and I was not sure yet if that was a comfort or a warning. By morning, I had already made one decision: I would not let this place decide who I became inside it. When I stepped out of the room, the hallway was already active in that quiet, efficient way, staff moving with purpose, no wasted motion, no unnecessary words. They acknowledged me with small nods, respectful but distant, like they had been instructed to recognize my presence without engaging with it. I followed the faint scent of coffee downstairs, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see how far my freedom actually extended. The kitchen was larger than my entire apartment had been: stainless steel, polished surfaces, everything in order. A woman stood near the counter preparing something with precise movements. She looked up when I entered, her eyes flickering with something quick: surprise, maybe curiosity, before settling into calm professionalism. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but clear. I nodded slightly, stepping closer. "Do I need permission to be here?" I asked, not as a challenge, just a question that needed an honest answer. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shook her head. "No, miss," she replied, but there was something careful in the way she said it, like the answer was correct but not complete. I reached for a cup, poured myself coffee, black, simple, familiar, and for the first time since arriving, something felt normal, something that belonged to me instead of him. I leaned lightly against the counter, taking a slow sip, grounding myself in something small and real. "You do not have to call me that," I said after a moment, glancing at her. She blinked just once, clearly not expecting that. "What should I call you?" she asked, and I gave her my name, my real name, the one I had not offered anyone here yet: Elena. It felt strange saying it out loud in this place, like I was placing something personal into a system that did not operate on personal things. She repeated it quietly, almost testing it: "Elena," and nodded, as if accepting something more than just a name. Footsteps echoed behind me before I could say anything else. Steady, familiar. I did not turn immediately. I did not rush to acknowledge him, because that would have given away something I was not ready to offer. Instead, I took another sip of coffee, slow, controlled, and then I turned. Sebastian stood at the entrance of the kitchen, his presence filling the space without effort, dressed as precisely as always, not a detail out of place. His gaze moved from me to the cup in my hand, then back to my face, not questioning, not disapproving, just observing. "You found your way," he said, and I almost smiled at the simplicity of it, as if this was a test I had passed without knowing it. "It is a house, not a maze," I replied, meeting his gaze evenly. A faint shift crossed his expression, something close to interest, like he was still trying to place me into a category that refused to hold. He stepped closer, not invading my space, but close enough that the air changed slightly. "There are areas you should avoid," he said, calm, matter of fact, not a warning, just a boundary. I tilted my head slightly, considering him. "And if I do not?" I asked, not challenging, just clarifying. His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Then you will learn why they are restricted," he replied, and there it was again, control wrapped in calm, expectation wrapped in certainty. I nodded once, accepting the answer without agreeing to it, and in that quiet exchange, something unspoken settled between us. He was used to obedience, to people adjusting themselves to fit his world, but I was not adjusting, not yet, and maybe not ever. And as I set the empty cup down and moved past him without waiting for permission, I felt it clearly, the shift, small but undeniable. This was no longer just his world, not entirely, because I had started to move inside it without asking, and he had not stopped me. By the third day, I stopped counting how many doors there were in that house, not because I had seen them all, but because I understood something more important. The number did not matter. What mattered was which ones I was expected not to open, and that realization settled into me slowly, like something that had always been there but only now made sense. I moved through the halls without asking, not recklessly, not trying to provoke anything, just observing, learning the rhythm of a place that functioned without hesitation. People appeared when needed, disappeared when not, conversations stopped when footsteps approached, resumed only when distance returned. It was not fear, not exactly, it was discipline, the kind built over time, reinforced by expectations that were never spoken out loud, and in the middle of it, there was me, a variable that did not follow the same rules, I noticed the way eyes lingered half a second longer when I passed, the way voices adjusted, not because I demanded it, but because they did not know where I fit yet, and neither did he. I found the first restricted door at the end of a quieter hallway, no markings, no guards, just a subtle difference in the handle, polished more often, used more frequently. It would have been easy to walk past it, pretend I had not noticed, but I had never been good at ignoring things that were clearly meant to be hidden. I reached out, my fingers hovering for a moment before closing around the handle, not hesitating, just acknowledging the choice, and then I opened it. The room beyond was not what I expected, not dramatic, not filled with anything that would confirm the stories people would imagine about a man like Sebastian Hale. Instead, it was simple, controlled, a workspace, large desk, clean surfaces, screens that reflected quiet data rather than chaos. It was not the content that caught my attention. It was the absence of excess. Everything here had a purpose, nothing existed without reason. I stepped inside slowly, the air slightly cooler, like this space was kept separate from the rest of the house in more ways than one. My eyes moved across the room, taking in details, the way papers were aligned perfectly, the way nothing was left unfinished. It told me more about him than any conversation could have. Control was not something he used when necessary, it was something he lived inside constantly. You were told there are areas you should avoid. His voice came from behind me, calm, steady, not raised, not sharp, but it still shifted the air in the room. I did not turn immediately. I let the silence sit for a second, letting him see that I was not startled, not caught in something I was trying to hide. And then I faced him, meeting his gaze without apology. You said I would learn why, I replied, my tone even, not defensive, just continuing the conversation he had started. He stood in the doorway, not blocking it, not closing the distance, just watching, always watching. His eyes moved briefly around the room, as if confirming nothing had been disturbed, then back to me. And have you? He asked, and there was something different in his voice now. Not irritation, something closer to curiosity again, like he was waiting to see if I would give him the answer he expected. I glanced around once more, then back at him. This is where you keep control, I said simply, and for a fraction of a second, something in his expression shifted. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. And you think that is something to avoid? He asked, his tone still calm, but more focused now. I shook my head slightly. I think it is something you do not share, I corrected, and that landed differently. I could see it, the way his posture adjusted just slightly, like I had touched on something he did not offer easily. The room fell quiet again, not tense, just full of something unspoken. And then he stepped aside, a small movement, but deliberate, clearing the doorway without saying a word, giving me space to leave if I chose to. I held his gaze for one more second, then walked past him, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving. And as I stepped back into the hallway, I understood something clearly for the first time since I arrived. This was not about breaking rules, this was about understanding them well enough to decide which ones mattered, and which ones did not. And behind me, I could feel his eyes still on me, not stopping me, not correcting me, just watching, as if he had realized something at the exact same moment I did. I was not here to be managed, and for the first time, that made his world just slightly less predictable. It changed after that door, not in a way anyone announced, not in rules written or spoken, but in the space between actions, the kind of shift you only notice when you are paying attention. And I had started paying attention to everything. The next morning, no one stopped me from moving through the house the same way I had the day before, but something in the air felt different, like the walls had been informed of me, like my presence was no longer an uncertainty but a variable being calculated. I saw it in the way the staff no longer hesitated when I entered a room. They adjusted faster now, smoother, as if my unpredictability had been accounted for, but not controlled, not yet. I stepped outside for the first time since arriving, the doors opening without question, the ground stretching wide under a pale sky, the air cooler than inside, carrying a stillness that did not belong to the city I came from. Gravel shifted under my shoes as I walked, slow, deliberate, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel each step, to remind myself that I was still choosing them. A few figures stood at a distance, security, positioned like part of the landscape, not approaching, not interfering, just present, always present. I ignored them the same way they ignored me, an unspoken agreement that neither side needed to acknowledge. I found the edge of the property without trying, the fence rising high, not decorative like the gates, but functional, final. I stopped a few feet away, not reaching for it, not testing it, just looking, understanding. This was where freedom ended for most people, not because they could not cross it, but because everything inside made leaving feel unnecessary. I exhaled slowly, letting that thought settle, and then I turned away. Not out of defeat, but because I was not ready to define myself by boundaries I had not fully explored yet. You are not trying to leave. His voice came from behind me, closer than before, quieter than expected. I did not turn right away. I let the moment stretch just long enough to make it clear that I was not reacting. I was deciding. Then I faced him, the distance between us smaller now, the open space making everything feel more direct, more honest. You said I could, I replied, simple. Factual. He nodded once, his gaze steady, searching, always searching. You have not asked how, he said, and there it was again, that expectation that questions should come before actions, that curiosity should lead to permission. I tilted my head slightly, considering him. I did not need to, I answered, and something shifted in his expression, not irritation, not confusion, something closer to recognition, like he was beginning to understand the pattern I was creating without realizing it. I was not testing the limits he set, I was ignoring the idea that limits defined anything at all. He stepped closer, the distance closing by a few feet, not enough to crowd me, just enough to change the weight of the moment. Most people would have tried by now, he said, his tone even, observational. I let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh, not quite agreement. Most people would have asked permission to stay, I replied, and that landed differently. I saw it in the stillness that followed. In the way his eyes held mine just a fraction longer, measuring something new, something he had not accounted for. The wind shifted slightly, brushing against my arms, grounding me in the present, in the reality of where I stood and who stood in front of me. And for the first time since I arrived, I saw it clearly, not the man everyone else saw, not the control, not the power, but the space behind it, the part of him that was used to outcomes being predictable, reactions being expected, people moving in ways that reinforced his world. And I realized something that made everything sharper, clearer, more dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I was not just outside his control, I was outside his expectations, and that was something far more unsettling, for him, for this place, for everything he had built, because as I stepped past him again, not waiting, not asking, just moving, I understood the truth that neither of us had spoken yet. I was not here to escape his world, I was here to change the way it reacted to me, and he was just beginning to realize he did not know how to stop that. The change did not come with a warning, it never does. It came in the form of something small, almost forgettable, the kind of moment most people would overlook, but I had learned by then that in a place like his, the smallest shifts carried the most meaning. It happened that afternoon when I returned inside, the air cooler than before, the silence slightly tighter, not louder, just more aware. I felt it before I saw it, the way the staff moved with a different kind of precision, faster, more contained, like something had been introduced into the system that required adjustment. I walked through it without slowing, without asking, because whatever had changed, it had not changed me, not yet. I found her in the kitchen again, the same woman from before, her movements just as exact, but her eyes flickered when she saw me, not fear, something closer to hesitation. Like she was deciding whether to say something she was not supposed to say. I stepped closer, resting my hand lightly against the edge of the counter, grounding myself in something real. What changed? I asked, not softly, not sharply, just directly. She froze for half a second, then resumed what she was doing, her voice lower when she answered. There was a call, she said, and that was all. No details, no explanation, just enough to confirm what I already felt. Something external had reached into this place, something that did not belong entirely to him, and that mattered more than anything she could have explained. Footsteps echoed behind me again, steady, familiar, but this time there was something different in the rhythm, less controlled, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. I turned before he spoke, meeting his gaze immediately, not giving him the moment to observe first. Sebastian stood a few feet away, his posture unchanged, his expression composed, but there was a tension beneath it now, subtle, like a line pulled tighter than before. You should stay inside for the rest of the day, he said, not a command, not quite, but closer than anything he had said to me before. I held his gaze, letting the words settle without reacting to them. "That sounds like a rule," I replied, and there it was. The space between us shifting again, not breaking, just stretching. He did not deny it, did not soften it, just watched me with that same steady intensity. "It is a precaution," he said instead, and the difference between those two words was everything. I tilted my head slightly, considering him, considering the way his world moved when something disrupted it. "For me?" I asked, and his answer came without hesitation. "For this house," and that told me more than anything else could have. I exhaled slowly, not out of relief, not out of fear, just to anchor myself in the moment, because this was the first time something outside of our controlled dynamic had entered the space between us, something he could not fully predict, something he could not solve with a single decision. I turned away from him, not dismissing, just choosing, walking toward the window that overlooked the grounds, the same view as before, the same stillness, but now it felt different, like the calm had edges I had not seen until now. "You cannot control everything," I said quietly. Not to challenge him, not to provoke, just stating something that had always been true. The silence behind me stretched for a second longer than usual, and when he spoke again, his voice was just as calm, just as measured, but there was something new beneath it, something closer to acknowledgement. "No," he said, and that single word carried more weight than anything else he had said so far, because it was not agreement, it was recognition. And I turned slightly, just enough to catch the shift in his expression, the way his certainty had adjusted, not broken, but changed, and in that moment, I understood something clearly. Whatever had entered his world was not just a threat to his control, it was a test of it, and for the first time since I arrived, we were not standing on opposite sides of a power dynamic, we were standing in the same uncertainty, and as the silence settled around us again, heavier now, more real, I realized something that should have unsettled me but did not. This was the first moment his world felt alive, not because it was perfect, but because it was no longer entirely predictable, and that was where things actually began to matter. That night, the house did not sleep the same way it had before, not that it ever truly slept, but the stillness had changed. It was no longer effortless, no longer untouched, it carried awareness now, like every corner was listening for something it could not quite identify. I felt it as I moved through the hallway, barefoot, the cool floor grounding each step, the silence pressing closer than before, not suffocating, just present. I stopped near the large window overlooking the drive, the same view that had once felt distant, untouchable, but now it looked different. The gates in the distance were closed, but not in the quiet, automatic way I had seen before. There was intention behind it now, a decision, not a routine. I rested my hand lightly against the glass, cool beneath my fingertips, steady, real, something I could feel without interpreting, and for a moment, I let myself think about leaving, not because I was ready, but because I needed to understand what that thought felt like now, after everything had shifted, after the space between us had changed, after his certainty had cracked just enough to let something unfamiliar in. Footsteps approached behind me, slower this time, not controlled in the same precise rhythm, but measured in a different way, like he was choosing each step instead of owning it. I did not turn right away. I let him arrive beside me, let the silence settle between us first, because silence had become our language, more honest than anything spoken. "You are still here," he said quietly, not questioning, not surprised, just stating something that mattered more than it should have. I exhaled softly, my gaze still on the gates. "So are you," I replied, and that was enough. That was everything, because we both understood what it meant. Neither of us had stepped away, not from the house, not from the agreement, not from whatever this had become. He moved slightly closer, not enough to touch, just enough to shift the air. "Things may change," he said after a moment, his voice lower, less certain than before, not weak, just aware, and I turned then, meeting his gaze fully, not searching for answers, just acknowledging the truth in what he said. "They already have," I answered, and something in his expression stilled, not frozen, just focused, like he was seeing something clearly for the first time without trying to control it. The silence stretched again, but this time it did not feel like distance, it felt like space, something that belonged to both of us instead of separating us. "If you want to leave," he began, and then stopped, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough to show that this was not the same offer he had made before, not The same certainty, not the same assumption that freedom was something he could grant and take back without consequence. I watched him carefully, the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way his eyes held mine without looking away, and I realized something that settled into me with quiet clarity. This was no longer about control, not entirely, it was about choice, his and mine, and the space where they met. I shook my head once, slow, deliberate. I am not leaving tonight, I said, not as a promise, not as a surrender, just a decision made in that moment. His gaze did not change, but something behind it did, something that did not have a name yet, something that did not fit into the structure he had built his world on, and for the first time since I met him, he did not respond immediately. He did not fill the silence with direction or expectation. He simply stood there, present, real, human in a way that had nothing to do with power. I turned back toward the window, the gates still closed, the night stretching beyond them, and I understood something that had taken me 9 parts of my life to fully accept. Freedom was never about leaving, not really, it was about staying when you had the option not to. And as the quiet settled around us again, softer now, less controlled, more honest, I realized the truth that neither of us had said out loud yet. He had built a world where everything could be commanded, everything except this moment, except me, except the choice I was making to stay, and that was the one thing he could never own.